All right, so we will dive right in. All right, the last couple of weeks we've covered a couple of topics. We covered nouns. How nouns have gender. Every noun is either masculine or feminine. And how every noun is either singular or plural. We discussed the plural endings for nouns, the masculine eem and the feminine ot. The next week we covered the definite article, which is the hey in front of a word, indicating the word the. And we talked about the rules for when this vowel is a patach and when it is a kametz, which again, since this is Sephardic Hebrew, it will be pronounced the same regardless, but it will just be written slightly differently. And we also discussed the fact that Hebrew has invisible words. And among those words are is, of, and a. So when you're constructing a Hebrew sentence, you need to mentally insert those where they belong, or otherwise you will be speaking in Tarzan speak. Okay. Because in Hebrew you can't say, I am Tarzan. So it would sound like me Tarzan, but to accurately translate into English, you need to insert these words because they are implied. Their meanings are implied in the Hebrew language. Okay? Okay, so the first thing I want to discuss today is irregular plural forms. And we touched on this some last week, but I want to go into some of the more common words that have these forms so that you don't get tripped up when you encounter them. The normal form of plurality in Hebrew is that a masculine noun, when it's made plural, ends in eem, and a feminine noun, when it is made plural, ends in ot. Okay, so to change fish, to change dog, which is a fish, into fishes, it becomes dagim. And to change Shabbat into Sabbaths, more than one Shabbat, becomes Shabbatot. Okay? Dog is a masculine noun, so it takes eem. Shabbat is a feminine noun, so it takes ot. Okay? So that is the standard rule, and this applies in most cases. However, there are exceptions. And so I want to cover some of the more common ones that you will encounter. And they are listed on that page, but I want to go through them just so you hear them. The first word we learned was av, which means father. And av is a masculine noun, and we would think that the plural would be avim, but it is in fact irregular. So av, when it's made plural, fathers, becomes avot. And in fact, the phrase avot is used very often, a lot of times referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They call them the fathers. Avot is the term that's used. Okay, another very common irregular plural. Bat is a daughter, but when it becomes plural, it takes on this nun and becomes banot. And it's an irregularity. You could never have predicted this. You would think it would be batot, but it in fact becomes banot. Another one very similar to this is the word for house. Is bayit. Bayit is a house. Bayit is a masculine noun, but when it is made plural, it drops its yod. So instead of being bayitim, it simply becomes batim. Okay? So father, daughter, and house, av, bat, and bayit all have irregular plural forms. And two other very significant words that have irregular plurals. Ish is a masculine noun. And Ish is a man. Isha is a feminine noun. And Isha is a woman. These terms are used in Genesis 2. It says he called her woman because she was taken from man. Ish and Isha. Actually, we have the same kind of linguistic parity in the terms man and woman. But these words both have irregular plurals. And again, since they are irregular, it's nothing you could predict. There's no rule that says this is going to happen this way. These are just things that, well, you just have to know. So Ish, instead of becoming Ishim, becomes Anashim. Again, this mysterious nun. Seems to invade the word. The yod drops out and is replaced by a nun. And Isha, instead of being Ishot, undergoes a very bizarre change. Isha becomes Nashim. So not only does it lose one letter, gain a totally different letter, but it also takes what would normally be the masculine plural ending. So Ish is man, Anashim is men, Isha is woman, and Nashim is women. So, are there any questions about these kind of strange irregularities? I'm sorry? Why does it change to a nun? I don't know. These are irregularities. There's no rule for why this happens. These are just things you have to memorize. The rule you memorize.
Something to do with the actual meaning of the symbols.
It could be. There's also, in some of these cases, there is some sort of logic behind it. And I don't want to go too far into that, but there's another word for man. Another word for man besides ish. And that word is enosh. And enosh is actually the name of, it's in Genesis in the list of genealogy, the first genealogy given in Genesis. It's might be Seth's son, Enosh, or maybe it's his grandson. But anyway, very early on, one of the very first people is named Enosh, and it means man. So it's thought that perhaps this Anashim is hailing back to this other word for man instead of Ish. The Nashim is irregular in any case. Why wouldn't it be Nashot? It just isn't. It's irregular. Okay. But anyway, those 5 words you're going to encounter in the Scriptures for sure, and also in everyday speech. You'll probably use the terms man and woman. So it's good to know that their plurals are irregular so that when people say Nashim, you don't think that there's some Nash word that you've never heard before. They are, in fact, talking about women. So, okay. All right, so those are the main irregular plurals, and as we encounter other words that have irregularities, I'll point them out as we go. It'll be in the notes section of your vocabulary lists. I encourage you to make your own vocabulary lists. For me, it's very helpful to write the words down in order to remember them, and so I encourage you to do that. I have them already typed up, but if you make your own, you can add to that from a dictionary or whatever you want. So possibilities are endless. So, but I do, yes?
I haven't done it yet, but I did learn that a good source to use Strong's Concordance to go in to find the roots.
Yes. He mentioned the Strong's Concordance is a great place to find root words, and that's very true. Strong's has a lot of roots. Strong's is not a good place to find non-root words. You will find some, but I've encountered it time and again talking to people that say, this Strong's is worthless. I looked up this word, and it's totally different in the actual Hebrew text than it is in the concordance. The concordance is wrong. Well, concordances do contain errors sometimes, but that's usually not one of them. The Strong's always takes you back to the root. And so you'll find a verb that's conjugated some way to be, the third person, future tense, feminine, passive voice. And so it shifts the word around quite a bit when it does that. But the Strong's doesn't have every instance of that exact conjugation. It has every instance of that root word. So regardless of what sense it's being translated in, you can always go back and say, this is the word it came from. That's the idea behind the Strong's and the Strong's numbers. So we'll get into roots more as we go along, because roots are the foundation of verbs and of other words too, but mainly verbs. So, yes?
Is there a good online translation, like Google has translated?
Okay, is there a good way to translate from English to Hebrew?
Yeah, that would show this.
I haven't found one. Yeah, Google Translate, of course, is there, but it's notorious for being mechanical. So it's only so much that a computer can do, even today. So, no, I haven't found one. But there are English-Hebrew dictionaries, which come in very handy. And actually, I can show you one after class. I'm not going to give a plug for it for everybody because I'm not promoting, materials to sell, but you can find English-Hebrew dictionaries, and they're very good. So I find mine invaluable. So that helps a lot, although again, you're going to get the modern translation. You won't necessarily get the biblical sense of every word, because the meanings of some words have changed over time. Because we live in a different culture. Israel's a different place now than it was 3,000 years ago, so the sense in which words are used is different. Camel doesn't mean the same thing today that it meant then. So, all right. So we are actually going to introduce a couple verbs, or just one verb, but the idea of verbs. We've already introduced nouns, which are persons, places, or things. And of course, a verb is an action word describing what a noun is doing. Verbs are very complicated, and the full range of what they do and how they function won't be covered for some time. But I do want to introduce them so that we can start constructing simple sentences. Because every sentence requires a subject and a verb. So, since we've covered nouns, we already have a wide variety of subjects we could use, so we need a verb for these subjects to do. So, the verb that I'll give is bait, aleph, with a comets under the bait. So this is pronounced ba, and ba is in the present tense. So you could translate ba is coming. Or perhaps even he is coming. Yeah, the root of ba means to come. Okay, so this is the present tense form, which would be is coming, as in right now. The subject is coming. So, to make a sentence out of this, if we have a man, Adam, okay, this is Adam, the name. If we write Adam ba, we have a sentence. Adam is coming. Or Adam comes. It is coming is the, well, yeah. Adam come perhaps would be one way of saying it, but it's not. The sense in which it's meant is the present tense, as in right now, Adam is coming. Okay? One important thing to note about Hebrew is I wrote this in English word order. Okay? Adam is, being invisible, coming. In Hebrew, it does not need to be in that order. In Hebrew, we could just as easily write, and in fact, more often than not, probably would write, ba Adam. Yes, verb followed by subject. Okay. Now, we would translate this the same way into English regardless of the order. Okay. Even though the order in which we're saying this is coming is Adam. All right. When we translate into English, we still say Adam is coming because the meanings of these two sentences are identical. Okay, in English, the word order is fluid between subject and verb. Okay, there are certain cases where word order must be a certain way to convey a certain meaning. And in Hebrew, the preferred word order is to have the verb first followed by the subject, followed by the object if there's in fact an object of the sentence, which we'll get to later. But verb subject is the preferred order. Usually if you see subject verb, the reason that's done is to draw attention to the subject. So this is Hebrew's way of emphasizing words, is to put those words at the beginning of a sentence. Okay, it does not change how we would translate the sentence into English. Okay, it's a nuance you'd only see in Hebrew because how else are you going to say that Adam is coming? I guess you could, underline one of the words, to draw attention to it, but it's just a nuance. It's just like when we put stress on a word in an English sentence by vocalizing it. That same stress you don't get in writing unless, perhaps you italicize it or something to that effect, but it doesn't change the literal meaning. It just changes subtly what you're trying to emphasize about that sentence. Okay? But the main point here is that word order is fluid. You can see verb-subject, you can see subject-verb. Neither one is correct or incorrect, but they both mean exactly the same thing. Okay? So Adam ba and ba Adam are the same. Yes?
So you would also see that for writings, like both?
Yes, you will also see that. It's not just a modern convention. You'll see that all over the Torah and the Tanakh. Now, there are conventions. Okay, normally you'll see verb, subject, object. Okay, 9 times out of 10, maybe, but it's still correct to write it any number of other ways. So yes, what Hebrew, so Hebrew, indicates emphasis and syntax and grammar differently than English. English relies on word order to convey the meaning of a sentence. Okay, the dog chased the cat chased the dog mean totally different things, but Hebrew doesn't rely on word order to convey the syntactical meanings. Okay, which one's the subject and which one's the object? In Hebrew, there's another indicator other than word order that tells you what the subject of a sentence is and what the object is. We'll get to that later when we start making more complicated sentences. But for now, do know that you'll see both of these forms, and they're both correct. Okay? Now, something to note about verbs is that if we were to change this sentence to have a feminine subject, so instead of talking about Adam, if we were talking about Sarah, okay, if Sarah were coming, since Sarah is a feminine subject, we cannot use a masculine verb to describe her actions. We have to use a feminine verb. Okay? To make ba feminine, now this does not apply to all verbs, it applies to this verb. Okay, so I want to stress that this is not a general rule for how to make a verb feminine, but this does make this verb feminine in this case. I want to introduce this, though, to introduce the idea that we have to use a feminine verb to accompany a feminine subject. We have to use a masculine verb to accompany a masculine subject. Okay? So for this verb to make it feminine, we add comets he. Okay, the same thing we add to make a noun feminine. More often than not, Sarah is a feminine name. A lot of feminine names, not all, but a lot end in comets he. And a lot of feminine nouns also end in comets he. Okay, so ba, to make it feminine, ends in comets he. Again, not every verb does this, but this one does. All right? So instead of Sarah ba, it is Sarah ba'a, or ba'a Sarah. Okay, either one means Sarah is coming. Okay. Just a few more examples. Subject doesn't have to be a specific person or thing. So we could just talk about a man in general. You could say ish ba or ba ish. That would mean a man is coming. And if we were to say isha, we would have to use ba'a because isha is a feminine noun. So to say a woman is coming, isha ba'a. Okay. Actually, these are sentences. Modern Hebrew does employ punctuation. So modern Hebrew will put periods at the end of their sentences, but to this day, if you read a Torah scroll, it has no punctuation in the Hebrew.
Put a colon in or something?
They do put colons at the end of verses in modern Torah scrolls, or not necessarily scrolls, but modern Hebrew translations. Yeah, if you pick up a Tanakh and it has Hebrew text in it, they will indicate the end of verses by a little colon mark. But it will not have commas, it will not have periods, it will not have quotation marks. And so that's actually probably one reason that the numbering of verses started, was to lend some clarity to that. Although once you know the language, it's usually pretty clear where a sentence begins and ends. Okay, but these are complete sentences. They have a verb and a subject. So there's your first Hebrew sentence. Any questions about this?
So can you go back over the emphasis again? I missed part of that.
Okay, so the emphasis in a sentence. So to say a man is coming, we could say ish ba, or we could say ba ish. The normal form of that sentence would be ba ish, okay, verb followed by subject. If we say ish ba, it's like saying a man is coming. Okay, a man as opposed to what? A woman, a dog, a camel. So it's the equivalent of doing that. The meaning of the sentence is exactly the same. There's just a nuance. We're emphasizing this part of the sentence to draw attention to it. Okay.
So the first part of the sentence.
Yes, the first part of the sentence is the part that's being emphasized.
Okay. So if we just want to emphasize that a man is coming, it's important that a man is coming.
Right. Right. To emphasize coming, we would put coming first, but that's not necessarily totally emphasizing coming. That's sort of the natural order that the words would be put in. Now, Hebrew is a very action-oriented language anyway, so it's only natural that if they put emphasis on the first part of the sentence, that usually verbs fill that part of the sentence. It's a very, very concrete, not a lot in the way of abstract in Hebrew. There's some abstraction, but usually words convey some sort of concrete meaning, even if sometimes they do it in a metaphorical sense. So. But yeah, it's like putting stress on a word to put it at the beginning of a sentence. Okay. Any other questions? All right. All right, well, I'll add another element to this then, just to get you acquainted with it, and sort of combine the last 3 weeks so you get to see the full spectrum of everything we're doing. Of course, if we say ish ba, a man is coming, we could say ha ish ba, or ba ha ish, the man is coming. Right? We haven't specified who the man is, but we have made that word definite. Okay, so the definite article can come and go in these sentences, depending on how definite we want the words to be. Suppose we were to say that men are coming. Now, of course, man, as we discussed, has an irregular plural. Ish has an irregular plural. So we write anashim for men. All right, we know that ba is masculine, right? So ba applies to ish. So we're on the right track with ba. However, number is also important with verbs. And I mentioned this last class, that the number of the verb tells you the number of the subject. Okay, so if we have a plural subject, anashim, men, we need a plural verb. Now in this case, not all cases, but in this case, which is why I chose ba, to make it plural, we simply add im. So anashim ba'im or ba'im anashim, either way means men are coming. Okay? And if women were coming, or are coming rather, we have an irregular plural. Isha becomes nashim. And we need a feminine plural verb now to describe depict the actions of nashim. And that's satisfied by ot. Okay? So even though nashim is an irregular plural, the verb still follows the standard form. Okay, so nashim is in fact feminine, and this is actually a clue. This is why we know that nashim is an irregular plural for isha. Okay, because if it were depicting some other word, or if the plural of women was for some reason masculine, there would be masculine verbs accompanying that word. The verb is a telltale sign for the gender of subjects. Okay, so when we look into the scriptures to try to piece together, okay, is this word singular, is it plural, is it masculine, is it feminine, the verbs are our indicators. Because the verbs don't have those kinds of irregularities. When a verb's plural, it's plural. And when it's singular, it's singular. So yes. So from this, we can kind of derive a rule concerning verbs, or concerning present tense verbs anyway, which is that verbs have to match their subjects in gender and in number. Okay, a masculine subject must take a masculine verb. A feminine subject must take a feminine verb. A plural subject must take a plural verb. Okay? You could do that as well. You could have 5 men are coming.
Which would be just one letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
No, in fact. The letters do have numerical value, but numbers in Hebrew are depicted by actual words describing the number. So, and that'll be a class where I go over numbers. But yeah, if you wish to write the number 1 in Hebrew, there's 2 ways to do it. You can go shorthand. Okay, so if you just write an aleph, okay, like that, or making a list or whatever you happen to be doing, you can use the letters and the numerical value of the letters as shorthand. In fact, if you read a Tanakh, when it gives the chapter numbers, it gives them via Hebrew letters. Okay, so that's the only time you'll see that. If you see a number spelled out, like in any verse that's describing how many years somebody lived, how many silver bowls and shekels, or whatever verse it may be, there are actual words for the numbers. So the word for 1, for example, is not just an aleph on its own, but it is echad. This is the number 1. Okay, and there's numbers for 1 through 10 and every multiple thereafter. How do they work? Numbers in Hebrew function as adjectives.
That's adjective.
Yes. So we're going to cover adjectives over the next couple of weeks. So we won't cover numbers specifically because there's special things that go on with numbers, but they function basically as adjectives. So, but yes, numbers can be inserted into these sentences. You know, you could even insert echad into the sentence "a man is coming" to make it "one man is coming." But you'd have to do it a certain way to make sure you satisfy the rules concerning that, which we'll get into a little bit next week. So.
That's probably out of order, but echad is a composite one when used in the Shema. Because that's what I've been told.
Yeah, echad is a funny word. Well, it's not that funny. It functions just like the English word one.
Okay, so one, there's one, but we are one.
Exactly. Yes, John 17. I would that they would be one even as we are one. Okay? He's not talking about, people like morphing together to become like the giant Power Ranger thing or whatever. He's talking about having unity. Okay? And so echad is literally the number one. Okay, as in the order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But yes, it's also used the same way English uses it. In Genesis 2, they shall be joined to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Okay, again, it's not talking about man and woman like, becoming sort of some kind of amoeba kind of thing. It's so yes, it's used metaphorically as well. And actually, there's a word related to echad. And in the song Hine Matov, this word is used. That word is yachad. And yachad means together. Okay? So yes, there is this sort of implication of composite unity in echad, but it also means literally the number one. So in the Shema, I believe that its sense is, in fact, the number one. Not that it excludes any composite definition, but since the Shema is a statement of monotheism, and it's kind of contrasting Israel with the rest of the nations, which have polytheism, a god of the sun, a god of the moon, a god of, the land, a god of this, a god of that. Israel has one God of everything. So in the Shema, I would not say that it's a composite, intended as a composite word, but echad is used in a composite sense other places, and it could be interpreted that way in the Shema too.
That's what I was talking about.
Right, but
God is many, God is infinite, but He is one.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The paradox of infinity, right there. So, but in the natural progression of if you have just one sheep, you have just one sheep. So.
So is it? Sorry, it's not going on.
Don't forget
No, that's
to
fine.
ask your questions.
Oh yes.
I'm just trying to understand how vast. I was just thinking that when you said as far as many but as one, and we are made in His likeness and His image, is that a singular or plural? Is that when that talks about man who's made in His image?
In His image. Okay. The verse that says that He's made in the image of Elohim. Image is used in the singular there. So. The question of, the question of the nature of God in that sense, singular, plural, infinite. All I can speak to as far as the language goes is the rules of the language. So, Elohim is a singular word as far as the rules of the language go. The definition of echad is one, but it can mean one in more of a metaphorical sense, if you will. One as in united. Okay, so that's regardless of your take on exactly how Yeshua and the Father connect, when he says, I would that they would be one even as we are one, he's talking about us being unified, about us being in one mind, in one accord, as it were, Acts chapter 2, because that's when things happen. So that's how we're supposed to function, as he functioned. So, but yeah, theologically, you can go all kinds of directions with that. So, and
people do.
And of course, people do.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where you come from a background where people are saying you need to take just what is written,
Mm-hmm.
but what is written?
Right. Yeah, the word as written. Of course, the closer we can get to the original, the better. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the way it's written excludes all possible interpretations except one. I think sometimes things are made intentionally ambiguous, or sometimes we just don't have the human comprehension to deal with certain ideas.
4,000 years ago.
Right. Yeah, we're also very culturally separated from the time in which it was written. So,
I'm sure that he read it very clear to
Right.
the people of the time.
right. Yeah.
Because they were to come to the gate and hear it read and understand it.
Mhm.
They didn't have to go to some seminary for
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There wouldn't have been, Moses Seminary, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think though.
Say, come and I'll explain it. It'll be read. You will hear it, and then you will understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. My personal opinion is that what ambiguities do exist in the original language, and there are some. There are a number of them. That's why there's different sects of Judaism. It's not all just people making stuff up to make up their own sect. It's saying, I see it this way, and somebody else saying, no, I really see it this way, and both of them have a case. And on the subject of unity, of Echad, I think one, perhaps, this is just me speculating, but perhaps one reason that is to see how we're going to handle that. If we both find, different ways of looking at something, how are we going to handle that amongst ourselves? The answer in most religious circles for most of time has been split apart. Unfortunately, in this country, those splits are usually nonviolent. They haven't always been that way, and to this day are still not that way. I say in this country, but this country has violent feuds with people from other countries, and a lot of the basis of that is religion. But anyway, I think that's part of what that's designed to do, is to develop character in us. At least I know it's developed some character in me. Because I used to be very, it's got to be this way, and, oh yeah. Well, everybody is that way to some extent. There's some things you have to be that way about. There's only you can't, certain verses you just have to interpret very harshly. Thou shalt not kill simply has to mean what it means, Not that you can't kill in self-defense, but, you can't, well, yeah, he did kill somebody, but, I like him. That certain things have to be very definite, but
I was at a conference, and a professor was doing a really in-depth dissection of the Hebrew language and showed that, and I wish I could remember, but there's a word in the Psalms that by moving a vowel point, one little dot down, it changed the Messiah from being Yeshua to being Israel.
oh, okay. Yeah, you mentioned there's a psalm where if you change a vowel point, it changes who the Messiah is in that psalm, whether it's Yeshua or whether it's Israel. There are a number of places like that, where one little thing kind of changes the direction a sentence can go. In fact, there's a number of those things when you look at the Hebrew version of Matthew that change just a couple things around, where if you translate it back into Hebrew and you change one little thing, it totally changes the meaning of a sentence. Now, most of those things aren't drastically significant doctrinally. But some of them are. Like, well, I won't go off. Yeah, well, yeah, that's one, but you can turn to the other 1,000 messianic prophecies to, get back on track with that probably. Yeah, there's definitely, even when you go back to the original language, there's room for interpretation. Is the bottom line, and so I think it kind of gets back to, we want to learn the language so we can learn the scriptures, so we can learn the Word of God and get closer to God that way. And that's great, and that's good, and I encourage that. That's why I'm teaching this class. But I think the bottom line, when it comes down to it, though, is that God exists absolutely. He exists even if we can't read. He exists whether we know Hebrew or not. And even though His Word is an expression of His will, He's really there, and our relationship with Him is deeper than just words on a page. And so that's one thing that, a revelation that's come to me through all of this, is I can't treat God as if He's a book. I need to treat Him as if He's always there. So, yes.
You said that one of the things from the historical of teaching Hebrew, do you know, was there only certain people that learned Hebrew as far as reading and writing, or was everyone taught?
Okay. So in ancient Israel, as it were, did everybody learn to read and write, or was it only the scribes or only certain elite people? I don't know the answer to that. Historians would have us believe that most of the population in all ancient cultures was illiterate. I don't know how they know that, though. From what, I don't know where they get their evidence to support that notion. Yeah, probably lack of text, oh, okay, they don't find books in people's houses. But if you go back a few thousand years, paper tends to rot. And now it is true that that books were more expensive back then, before the printing press, no doubt about that. It was an involved process to make papyrus, or certainly to make sheepskin, which is what Torah scrolls were written on. So it's pretty safe to say that every family in ancient Israel did not have a Torah scroll. That would just be the priests and the, maybe the elders and the king who was required to write his own. So yes, that's one reason they had to assemble and have it read, because everybody didn't have access to it. I would think it to be presumptuous to assume that most of the people couldn't read, though, especially if you consider Jews today and how their culture is about education. They're very education-centered as a culture. And there are so many Jewish doctors and lawyers and even politicians, scientists. They're and it's not necessarily that that's the way they always were, but, well, if you go back to Jacob, that's kind of how he was. He was very ambitious, very driven, and learned a lot of different things.
Yeah, I would submit, too, that that's why the synagogue was so important. Like, everything in Jewish culture, their lives revolved around being near a synagogue.
Right, yeah. Yeah, Dave just mentioned that, being near a synagogue was very important in Jewish culture, and to learn, to be educated. And so,
Pointed out that you'll find in every Jewish home, that you won't necessarily find in other homes. Library.
Okay, yes, every Jewish home has a library. This is true from my experience, yeah, although I haven't met every Jew in the world, but yeah, no, it's quite true. And even, it's a cultural thing even among, almost especially among non-religious Jews, but religious Jews too. Secular Jews, place a lot of emphasis on learning, and so it strikes me as odd that they think that so many people were illiterate back then.
Someone mentioned that the reason for them becoming so intellectual was because they were always being uprooted, so they couldn't pack their tools or their trade.
Right.
So they had to go to intellectual trades.
That's a possibility, yeah. The Jews have definitely been persecuted quite a bit throughout their history, and so yeah, perhaps they turned to intellectual trades to, because that's something they could maintain. But whatever the case, now coming right out of Egypt after being in slavery, at that time, perhaps the literacy rate, you could say was lower, because who has time to learn to read while you're, stomping on straw? But perhaps not. I mean, these are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob we're talking about here. So, but anyway, so I don't know what the literacy rate was. I suspect, though, that it was probably higher than they say it was. It's not. People weren't dumber then than they are now. The intellectual capacity of human beings has not improved over the years. We just have cheaper duplication of information now. That's why the internet is such a big deal, because I can, knowing nothing about cars, I can go online now and find out how to change my brakes on my particular car. And it's dependent on it's dependent on somebody taking the time to put that up there for free for anybody to use, but it's available, at just a couple clicks, and I'm definitely no mechanic, and I've changed my brakes doing that exact thing. So, that's amazing. 100 years ago, or good grief, 20 years ago, that would be just crazy, unbelievable that people are doing that. So,
And you said something that is valid, that with technology, a lot of people can do a lot more.
yes, technology definitely enables us to do a lot more. It's easier to educate people now, especially with the internet now. A number of people who are probably watching this on YouTube, they don't even have to be there. Not only do they not have to be present, but they don't have to be on the same timing. So, the literacy rate is a historical question that I don't have the answer to, but I suspect that it's higher than they suggest. I also suspect that the education level among women was higher than they suggest. There's kind of this stereotype about ancient cultures. Oh, they were all, come home and say ugh, and that means give me dinner, and, that's kind of how that goes. That's kind of how I am some days. But I don't think the cultures that built the pyramids and Stonehenge and all that were as they had some things going on up here that we underestimate. So. All right. Well, I think I'll wrap it up for today. So I hope you enjoyed the tangents. We'll see you next week. Shalom.